Hi, my name's Brenna. At my husband's family dinner, his mother looked me straight in the eye and said, "Why don't you call your hillbilly mom? Maybe she can mop my floors." My husband? He didn't defend me, he just whispered, "Maybe she's right." And I said nothing, not because I agreed, but because I thought, maybe they were right too. But that silence, it cost me more than my pride. It nearly cost me my future. Before we begin, tell me, have you ever stayed silent just to keep peace when every part of you wanted to scream? Let me show you what silence really costs, and what it can give back. I remember the weight of the silence as I stepped out of Malcolm's car that evening. The air in Austin was thick, late summer humidity pressing against my skin, but it wasn't the heat that made my chest tighten. It was the house, Celine's house. Every time I stood in front of that mansion, I felt like a child again, small, unwelcome, and wrong. Tonight felt worse. I kept my head low as I followed Malcolm up the stone steps. He didn't say much. He never did on these nights. Just one glance my way, like he was bracing himself too. But I knew he wasn't bracing for me. He was bracing for her. The door swung open before we even knocked. "Finally," Celine said flatly, turning without waiting. Her voice carried the same sharpness as her perfume, a sound that lingered long after she walked away. Inside, everything was gleaming. Floors that looked untouched by footsteps, chandeliers that caught every bit of light, and silence. Always that silence, thick as syrup. I stayed a step behind Malcolm as we moved toward the dining room, heels clicking against marble. Celine didn't glance back to see if I kept up. She knew I would. What choice did I have? The dining room opened like something from a catalog. Long mahogany table, 12 chairs lined like soldiers, all pointed toward the head where Celine presided like royalty. Her friends, society women I didn't know by name but recognized by posture, were already seated. Every one of them turned when we entered. Every one of them looked at me. Celine gestured toward the far end of the table. "You can sit there, Brenna." I followed her hand. My seat wasn't even at the table properly. It was a narrow side chair tucked in the corner near the hallway door, a seat you'd pull out if the gardener dropped by. The cushion was stained. I stood there for a moment too long. "Is there a problem?" Celine asked, arching a brow. I shook my head. "No." I sat. I told myself it didn't matter. A chair's a chair. But my stomach knew better. I forced my gaze down, away from the polished cutlery, away from the glances exchanged across the table. I told myself to stay small, stay quiet. Tonight was just another dinner. Just get through it. Celine broke the silence. "So, Brenna, how's life on the farm?" A few soft chuckles rolled down the table. "It's not a farm," I said softly, not looking up. "No? Could have fooled me. I suppose your mother's still tending the animals." Celine's voice dripped with false curiosity. I said nothing. Words felt dangerous. Celine leaned back, swirling her wine lazily, watching me. "Maybe you should call her. Your hillbilly mom, I mean. Maybe she can come mop my floors. That's what she's good at, right?" The room froze. I stared at the knot of wood in the table edge, where my fingers gripped too tightly. Somewhere, I registered my breath shaking. But I said nothing. Malcolm shifted beside me. Celine's eyes flicked to him. "Well? Am I wrong?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, so quietly it barely reached me, he muttered, "Maybe she's right." I looked at him. I wish I hadn't. Because he wasn't looking at me, he was staring at the table, shoulders hunched, face blank. The man who once promised to protect me from everything had chosen silence. That hurt more than Celine's words ever could. The room blurred at the edges. Conversations started again, distant, like I wasn't there. Maybe I wasn't. I found myself staring at my lap, where my mother's handkerchief sat folded between my fingers. I hadn't even realized I'd brought it. White cotton, embroidered blue edges. She'd given it to me years ago, when I first moved to Austin. "In case you miss home," she'd said. Now I just held onto it like a lifeline. I didn't cry. Tears would have given Selene something real to mock, so I sat in that stained, forgotten chair while laughter bubbled around me like nothing happened. I counted breaths, focused on the threads of the fabric, and in that moment, I felt myself disappear. I should have said something, anything, but all I did was stay silent. I didn't speak on the ride home. Neither did Malcolm. The car moved through the quiet Austin streets like a ghost. Outside the windshield, the streetlights blurred past, each one flickering like an accusation. I watched the reflections glide across Malcolm's face, waiting for him to glance at me, to say anything. He didn't. Yeah, his hand stayed steady on the wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. Not once did he turn toward me. Not even when we stopped at that red light near South Lamar, where we used to grab tacos late at night after movie dates. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't explain. He didn't even ask if I was okay. I sat there in the passenger seat like a stranger. Worse, like baggage he forgot to leave behind. When we pulled into the driveway of our modest house, a place I once called home, I stepped out before he turned the engine off. I didn't wait for him to follow. I just walked inside, set my purse down gently on the hall table, and stood there, listening to the silence. I thought the silence back at Celine's house was suffocating. But this was colder. Behind me I heard the car door shut, then his slow footsteps. The key twisted in the lock unnecessarily. He was locking me in, or maybe locking himself out. I turned. He stood there in the doorway, eyes down, keys still in hand. I asked, voice barely above a whisper, "Do you want to talk about it?" His answer was the shrug. The same shrug he gave when he didn't want to pick a restaurant, or when his mother criticized my cooking. "I'm gonna take a walk," he said finally, voice flat. A walk. At nearly midnight. I didn't stop him. I stepped aside. He moved past me without meeting my eyes, pulled the door open, and left. No jacket, no words, just the sound of the door closing behind him. And then, there I was, alone. I moved to the kitchen without thinking. Everything was muscle memory. I opened the fridge, stared inside, even though I wasn't hungry. Leftover casserole from the night before, a few slices of ham, half a carton of eggs. I pulled out the casserole. I ate standing up at the counter. Each bite was cold, bland. I chewed, but the food just sat heavy in my mouth. Swallowing took effort. I counted every forkful, but I didn't taste a thing. At one point I stopped mid-bite, fork halfway to my mouth, because I saw it again. The look. It wasn't Celine's words that silenced me tonight. It wasn't her sneer. Not really. It was Malcolm's eyes. The way he looked at me when she mocked my mother. Not like I was his wife. Not like I was someone worth defending. He looked at me like I was a mistake. A burden he didn't know how to unload. I replayed that moment in my mind as I stood there in the kitchen, casserole turning cold on the counter. He didn't even flinch when Celine spat those words about my mom. He didn't grip my hand under the table. He didn't whisper that it wasn't true. He just looked at me like I was exactly what she said, a hillbilly, a mistake, and maybe the worst part? For a second, I believed him. I set the fork down carefully. Without realizing it, my fingers curled around the handkerchief in my pocket, the one I'd clutched during dinner. My mother's embroidery soft against my skin. I remembered her hands stitching it, her voice, her laugh, and I hated myself, because I hadn't said a word to defend her. I moved to the sink, ran the water hot, filled a bowl with soap, dropped the handkerchief in and watched it sink, bubbles swirling around it like fog. I stood there, leaning on the edge of the counter, staring down as the fabric twisted and turned in the water. When had I stopped defending myself? When had I started believing Celine's voice in Malcolm's silence? When did I become someone who just sat and let it happen? I felt the crack inside me widen. I drained the bowl, rinsed the handkerchief, laid it flat on a towel. My hands shook, not from anger but from something emptier, like standing too long in the cold. I left it there on the counter and walked to the living room. The couch felt foreign. I sat, knees tucked under me, staring into the dark. And in that stillness, I told myself the truth. I didn't stay silent tonight for peace. I stayed silent because I didn't think I deserved to speak. I let myself believe that maybe they were right, that maybe I really was just the mistake Celine thought I was, and that look Malcolm gave me? It broke something inside me. I wondered if my mother knew that tonight I lost the last piece of myself. I sat in the silence until I didn't know what time it was. Somewhere between sitting on that couch and staring at nothing, I must have dozed off. I woke with a jolt when the phone rang, slicing through the quiet like a blade. 2:03 a.m. I blinked at the screen, disoriented. Mom. For a second, I debated not answering, just letting it ring, pretending I was asleep, pretending none of this had happened, but my thumb moved before I could stop it. "Hello?" My voice cracked, brittle as old paper. Her voice came soft, steady. "How's my girl?" That was all she said. No scolding, no questions, not even surprise at me answering after months of missed calls and empty texts. Just 4 simple words. I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because the answer hurt too much. My throat closed. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear as if that could bring her closer, as if I could disappear into that small, familiar voice. She didn't push. I felt the tears long before I realized I was crying. My whole face burned and I couldn't hold the sob in. It came out ugly, raw, without dignity. But Mom didn't flinch, didn't speak. She just let me cry. For minutes, maybe. I don't know how long. But when the tears finally dulled to hiccups, she said one thing. "Call me when you're ready." She didn't ask what happened, didn't beg to come over, didn't make me explain, just left the door open. Then she hung up. I stared at the phone long after the call ended. It should have felt like comfort, but all I felt was guilt. I wiped my face on my sleeve and looked around the dark room like it could tell me what to do next. I checked my messages out of habit. One conversation sat there unanswered. Malcolm. I'd texted him before, after he'd left for his walk. Hours ago now. "Can we talk?" 2 words. Nothing dramatic, nothing pleading, but it sat there, blue bubble glowing under the word, delivered, not read. He hadn't even looked. Something about that, seeing it in black and white, hurt worse than any insult Celine could have thrown. At least when someone spits in your face, they're looking at you. I set the phone down face down like it burned, but the damage was already done. That single line echoed louder than my mom's voice. He didn't care enough to read it. I sat back against the couch, pulled my knees up, and let my mind drift where it always did when the silence got too heavy. Back to when things were simpler. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table as a little girl, legs swinging, while Mom stitched my name onto that handkerchief. Brenna, in soft green thread. I used to watch her hands move like magic, thread looping through fabric as she told me stories about her childhood, about my grandmother. Each stitch was a word, each knot a secret shared. I never understood why she took such care with something so small. Now, as an adult, I kept that handkerchief close like a lifeline. She said it was for when you need something steady. I traced the memory with my thumb, knowing the real thing lay drying on the counter, still damp from my guilt. I wondered when I stopped believing I had anything steady left. The house felt colder suddenly. I told myself I should sleep, that tomorrow things would be clearer. But deep down, I knew better. Tomorrow wasn't going to fix this. I closed my eyes and whispered aloud, to no one. It's not the right time to fight. It was easier to believe that. Safer. But something inside me whispered back, what if there's never a right time? I sat there trapped between the two. Morning was still hours away. But when the sun finally rose, my mother didn't wait for my call. She showed up. I woke to the sound of knocking, not loud, not urgent, just steady. At first I thought I'd dreamed it, but when I sat up, hair sticking to my face, my heart already knew. Mom. I pulled myself off the couch, each step heavier than it should have been. When I opened the door, she was standing there like she'd been waiting all night. Marla Shipley, my mother. She didn't smile, didn't ask why I hadn't called. She just looked at me in that way only she could, part disappointment, part unspoken understanding. I hadn't called her, but she came anyway. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Put your shoes on. I blinked at her, confused. We're leaving. I should have argued, should have asked why, but all the fight had drained out of me sometime between last night's silence and this morning's ache. I stepped back, slipped on my sneakers, not because I understood, but because there was nothing left in me to resist. She waited, patient as ever, until I grabbed my phone and followed her out. The sun was already climbing, Texas heat creeping into the morning air. Mom's old Ford truck sat in the driveway like some stubborn relic. She climbed in without a word. I didn't ask where we were going. Maybe part of me didn't care. I sat beside her, shut the door, and listened to the engine start. And then silence. The kind that wasn't comfortable. The kind that pressed down on your chest. I could hear everything. The tires grinding over the road, the soft whir of the AC, the click of her turn signal, steady as a heartbeat. Mom didn't say a word. I kept waiting for her to speak, to ask me what happened last night, to tell me she'd seen Malcolm's car parked outside, or that she'd heard from someone. She didn't. She just drove. I stared out the window, watching Austin blur past, stores opening for the day, people walking dogs, life moving like nothing had broken. But inside me, everything had. I started counting streetlights just to distract myself. 1, 2, 3. Still nothing. Finally, I couldn't take it. Where are we going? Her eyes never left the road. You'll see. I hated that answer. 5 more miles. 10. She turned toward the edge of town. The farm, I thought. She's taking me back to the farm. Maybe she thought I needed a reset, some fresh air, some time to remember who I used to be before all this. But then, she missed the turn. I sat up straighter. Mom? No answer. We weren't going to the farm. I looked around, heart tightening. I knew this road. I knew exactly where she was driving. Where are we going? My voice cracked this time. She didn't look at me, just kept her hands firm on the wheel. I'm tired of waiting for you to remember who you are. Her words hit harder than any slap, because I knew what that meant. We weren't driving to safety. We were driving straight to Selini's mansion. I could see the stone walls now, the iron gates up ahead. Panic clawed at my throat. What are you doing? My voice was small, scared. Mom didn't answer. She flicked the turn signal, left. The same steady click. Every sound felt louder, the tires rolling, the wind pressing against the windows, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I wanted to scream, tell her to turn around, that I wasn't ready. But deep down, I wasn't scared of Celine. I was scared of facing myself. Why am I scared of my own mother? Because she saw me. She saw through every lie I told myself, and then I saw it. We weren't driving home. We were driving straight to her. I sat frozen in the passenger seat as the iron gates of Celine Rooker's mansion swung open like a silent warning. Mom didn't slow. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, her face unreadable as we rolled up the long stone driveway. Celine's house looked even larger in daylight. A statement, not a home. Tall windows gleamed like judgmental eyes. I remembered the first time I'd seen this place, how small I'd felt standing in front of those doors. I felt even smaller now. Mom parked near the front steps. She didn't turn to me. She didn't explain. She just opened her door and stepped out like she belonged there. I sat there for a few seconds, not moving, just watching her stride toward the front door, calm, composed, not a trace of hesitation. I scrambled to catch up. By the time I reached her, she was already raising her hand to knock, but she didn't need to. The door opened. Celine stood there. Her perfect hair, her perfect silk robe, that half smile that wasn't really a smile at all. Her gaze flicked from me to Mom, expecting something. A sorry, an excuse. Instead, Mom said it clear and steady. I believe you called for the maid. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Celine's mouth opened, but no words came out. Mom took a step forward, not invading, not threatening, just standing. And here I am. I could feel the air shift. Celine's expression cracked just slightly. Enough. I wanted to say something, anything, but I was too busy watching the woman I thought I knew rewrite herself. Mom, my mother, who wore old boots and washed dishes by hand, stood there like the owner of this mansion. Celine blinked, once. "Who are you?" Mom tilted her head, polite, almost amused. "Marla Shipley." No reaction, so Mom clarified. "Owner of Shipley Cattle, 8 counties, supplying beef to every premium restaurant from here to Houston." Silence. "And yes, Mrs. Rooker," Mom added softly, "I do mop floors, in buildings I own." Celine's lips parted. No sound. I saw it then. For the first time, Celine Rooker had nothing to say. Mom looked past her into the house, then calmly stepped forward. Celine didn't stop her. I followed, dazed. Inside, everything felt smaller somehow, or maybe it was just me, seeing it different. Mom walked straight to the sitting room. She didn't ask permission. She sat down in Celine's favorite chair like she belonged there. Celine trailed behind, confused, fragile. Malcolm's voice cut in from the hallway. "Mom, what's going on?" He appeared, still half-dressed from the morning, eyes darting between Celine and Mom, confused, unsure. He looked at me last, like I was supposed to explain. I didn't. Instead, I watched him stare at Mom, seeing what Celine saw. A stranger, a woman who didn't fit their narrative. Mom rested her hands calmly on the chair's arms, her voice cool. "You asked about my family last night, Malcolm." He didn't answer. "You called my daughter's mother a janitor, a hillbilly maid, I believe." Malcolm's face paled. Celine tried to recover, her voice brittle. "No one meant offense." Mom's reply was steady. "You intended humiliation, and you succeeded." I couldn't breathe. Celine tried again. "We don't need to make this dramatic." Mom's eyes were ice. "I don't do drama, Mrs. Rooker. I do business and family." She turned slowly to me, and then my mother looked at me. "Do you want to handle this? Or should I?" I looked at my mother, sitting there like she belonged in that grand room, calm as stone. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Every instinct told me to stand, to speak, to do something, anything. But Celine moved first. She shifted, not visibly, not obviously, but it was there. A tilt of her head, the narrowing of her eyes. She adjusted her silk robe like she was dusting herself off from the humiliation, slipping back into the role she knew best. Control. "I suppose this is all quite dramatic for a misunderstanding," Celine said softly, smoothing the front of her robe, her voice once again polished and cold. "Let's not turn this into a scene." I felt Mom's body stiffen beside me, but Celine wasn't looking at her anymore. She looked at me, and I realized she wasn't trying to convince my mother. She was targeting me. Celine's tone shifted to something sweet, condescending. "Brenna, dear, I know all this must be confusing for you. Maybe you didn't understand what your mother signed." I blinked. "What?" Celine's smile was slow, sharp. "I have something for you." She walked to the side cabinet, pulled out a leather-bound folder like it was just another part of her morning ritual, and placed it on the glass table between us. "For your family's records," she said smoothly. "I thought you might want a copy." Mom didn't move. But I leaned forward, almost against my will, drawn to the folder like it might explain everything. Celine opened it casually, as if showing vacation photos. My mother's signature stared back at me. The words blurred, but I caught the phrases: transfer of interests, minority shares, formal sale, all tied to Mom's ranch. "This isn't real," I whispered. But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at my stomach. Celine tapped the paper gently. "I can assure you your mother signed this herself. Of course, if you'd like your own lawyer to review it, by all means. But be quick, darling. These things move fast in business." Mom still hadn't spoken. I turned to her, desperate. "Mom, tell me this isn't real." She stared at the document for a long, terrible moment, then her voice, low but steady, said, "That's not my signature." Celine's eyes flickered, Mom's tone hardened. "It's traced, poorly." But my relief never came, because Celine wasn't trying to prove it to Mom. She turned back to me, smiled softly, and said the words that broke something inside me. "You can stay quiet, as usual, and watch them believe me." The air vanished from my lungs. I felt it then, not her words, but the weight behind them. All these years, my silence had been survival, a shield. Now it was the weapon she'd twist against me, because Celine understood something I never had. Silence didn't protect you. It marked you as guilty, as weak, as someone not worth believing. And I stayed silent. I watched her stand there, smiling softly, her eyes already imagining the people she'd show that contract to, the stories she'd tell, the lies that would stick because I wouldn't speak. My body felt frozen, not just my voice, but my mind. My stomach churned as my heart slammed against my ribs. "Say something, Brenna. Say something." But the words wouldn't come. I saw it in her face. She knew. She'd won. And then quietly, beside me, I heard Mom stand. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. But I heard her voice, low, certain, meant only for me. "She's still too scared. I'll handle this." Something inside me cracked. I stood there, frozen, as Mom's chair scraped back from the table. I heard her footsteps, steady, measured, as she walked toward Celine. I could feel Celine's confidence returning, layer by layer now that the weight was back on Mom's shoulders. That was her tactic, always. Let you break yourself, make you watch as someone else fights your battle. I couldn't let her. Not this time. I don't know what pulled me from that paralysis. Maybe it was the way Celine looked at my mother like a nuisance to swat away. Maybe it was Malcolm's silence, like 1,000 other silences before. Or maybe it was simply exhaustion. Exhaustion from spending a lifetime apologizing for who I was. My voice came before I thought about it, quiet, flat. "I'm done." The room stilled. Celine blinked, her mouth parting. "What?" I forced the words out, one after another. "I'm done apologizing." Silence, thick as concrete. For being her daughter. Celine's expression faltered, confusion chasing her usual smugness. Malcolm's brow furrowed. "And I'm done apologizing for being your mistake." I turned toward him, locking eyes, his jaw tensed, his shoulders lifted, like he wanted to speak to defend himself, but nothing came. Just like me. All those years. Celine recovered first. "Brenna, this isn't—" "No," I cut in, sharper now. "It is." I stood fully then. My hands trembled, but I folded them calmly in front of me. My mother didn't move. She didn't need to. I looked straight at Celine. "You thought you knew who I was. You called me the Hillbilly's daughter. You made sure everyone else did too." Her eyes narrowed, walls rebuilding. But she didn't interrupt. Not this time. "What you never asked," I continued, my voice shaking less with every word, "is what my mother taught me." I let that linger, just long enough. "She didn't teach me how to scrub floors, Celine. She taught me how to run them." The silence cracked. I could see it. The shift. Confusion pulling at the corners of Celine's mouth. Her calculations stumbled, just long enough. "I'm not just her daughter," I said evenly. "I'm her business partner." Celine frowned, glancing sideways toward Malcolm, but he looked just as blindsided. "For the past 5 years," I said slowly, deliberately, "I've been managing supply contracts across 4 states, livestock brokerage, land acquisition, premium feed distribution. I've signed every deal, negotiated every rate. I own 43% of my mother's ranch corporation." I heard it then, the quiet intake of breath from Celine, sharp, disbelieving. "Check the county records if you want," I said, voice flat, "or the bank filings, or the state's ag commission." I watched her face change, from superiority to confusion, from confusion to fear, and it was beautiful. For the first time in my life, I saw Selene Rooker lose her footing. "You played the wrong game, Selene," I said quietly, "and you picked the wrong Maid." I turned, slowly, toward Malcolm. His face had drained pale, his lips parted, eyes searching mine like he'd never seen me before, and in that moment, I knew he hadn't. "I asked you once," I said, softer now, "why you married me, and you said, because you were simple." His mouth opened, but no words came. "I'm not." I felt no satisfaction saying it, no triumph, just truth and peace. I looked back at my mother then. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Selene stumbled back a step, bumping into the edge of her ornate chair, hand grabbing the backrest like it was the only solid thing left. I reached into my purse, and slowly, carefully, I pulled out the old embroidered handkerchief, the one my mother gave me, the one I'd clutched in silence all those nights I let people like Selene talk over me. I folded it. Once, twice, 3 times. The embroidery hidden now, safe. I slid it gently back into my purse. And then I looked up, straight at Selene. And then I said 7 words that burned the room down. "You don't own me, or my mother." Those 7 words left my mouth so quietly, so calmly, I almost didn't recognize my own voice. But their weight settled into the walls like bricks. Selene's lips parted, but no sound came. For once, she didn't have a line rehearsed. She just stared, caught between disbelief and outrage. I stayed still, watching her. My hands, once shaking, now rested steady against my sides. My mother stood behind me, silent, but I could feel her presence like a shield I didn't need anymore. Selene's silence cracked first. "I suppose you think you've won," she spat finally, her voice brittle. Her eyes darted to Malcolm, but he didn't meet her gaze. He stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight. For the first time, he looked unsure whose side he was supposed to be on. Selene's chin lifted. "You may have embarrassed me in my own home. You may think this makes you powerful. But in this town?" She let out a brittle laugh. "People listen to me. They trust me. You might win this room, Brenna, but I'll win the town." I didn't flinch. Selene stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the air. "One phone call. That's all it takes. A few rumors. Maybe a whisper that your mother's ranch is failing. Maybe a few people wondering if your livestock are sick. Contamination, financial fraud. You'd be surprised what sticks even when it's not true." I let her speak. I let her spill every drop of venom she had left. And then, when her voice faltered, when she stepped back expecting me to break, I reached into my purse. I saw her flinch, just slightly. I pulled out the envelope. Plain, white, thick. I held it out, steady. "What's this?" she demanded, her bravado cracking at the edges. I said nothing. Selena hesitated, then snatched the envelope from my hand. She ripped it open carelessly. Her eyes scanned the first few lines of the document inside, and I watched it happen. The shift. Her face drained. The composure slipped. Then the arrogance. Then the power. It was like watching a building collapse in silence. "That," I said softly, "is a cease and desist letter, filed and dated 2 months ago. Every message you've sent, every whisper you've started, every false claim you've planted, documented, filed, prepared." Selene swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "I've been waiting for this day," I continued, "for you to make your move, and now I've got yours, documented in black and white." She shook her head, disbelief flickering. "You wouldn't try me," she faltered. "Next time you spread a word about my mother or me, it won't be our lawyers you'll answer to. It'll be federal court." I let that land. "And I won't have to say a word," I finished quietly. "The paperwork will." Selene's hand trembled as she held the envelope, the papers inside suddenly far heavier than their weight. Behind her, Malcolm shifted, his gaze flickering from me to his mother. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. He wasn't moving to protect her. He was watching her fall. Selene tried to find something, some thread of control to grab onto. But nothing came. Her mouth opened, then closed. The cracks spread too far, too fast. The woman who'd spent years dictating every conversation, every rumor, every sneer, stood paralyzed in her own home. And I? I stood still. I let the silence belong to me now. The same silence that had once crushed me was now hers. It hung there, heavy, defining. Without a word, I stepped back. I turned toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I walked out of that lounge room, the sound of my own footsteps echoing softer with each step. I reached the front hall. My mother followed a few paces behind, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. I reached the front door. I paused. I waited. But there was nothing. No insult, no final threat, no footsteps chasing me. For the first time in my life, she didn't follow. That thought stayed with me as I drove home. I didn't remember starting the engine or pulling out of her driveway. My mother followed behind me in her truck, but we didn't speak, not even after parking in front of my house. She just gave me a nod, a small, silent one, and drove away. And that was that. The house was unusually quiet when I stepped inside, not just empty. Quiet in a way that felt intentional, like the house itself knew something had changed. The usual clutter of Malcolm's keys on the entryway table wasn't there. His shoes weren't by the door. His scent, that faint aftershave he always wore, was gone. I walked through the rooms without turning on the lights. Malcolm hadn't come home, and somehow I knew he wasn't going to. There were no messages on my phone, no apology waiting in my inbox. I didn't check, but I knew. Maybe he'd known before I did that whatever held us together snapped the moment I turned my back on his mother. Or maybe the silence between us finally said what words never could. Later that week, on a morning just like any other, a plain envelope arrived. No return address, no note, no fanfare. Inside were divorce papers. No explanation, no plea for understanding, just the papers. I stood at the kitchen counter, staring at them. Not with sadness, not even surprise, just relief. It was strange, realizing I felt nothing except freedom. No weight dropped, no chains fell away. It was quieter than that. It was like realizing the door had been unlocked for years, and I had only just now chosen to step outside. I signed where needed, folded the papers, left them on the counter for my lawyer, and then I cleaned. Not because the house needed it, because I did. Dusting the shelves, wiping the counters, scrubbing the places that had been mine long before Celine's voice echoed inside these walls. Places Malcolm had walked through like a guest, never truly seeing. That's when I found it. I was wiping down the kitchen table when I saw the small, familiar shape resting quietly near the edge. My hand froze. The handkerchief. Neatly folded. Right where I couldn't miss it. I hadn't left it there. Mom. She must have placed it there sometime after that morning at Celine's mansion. Without a word. I imagined her walking into the house, knowing I wouldn't stop her, knowing I wouldn't argue, quiet as always, but leaving this behind. I sat down at the table, the cloth between my fingers. I remembered when she embroidered my name onto it. I'd been 7. I'd thought it was the prettiest thing I'd ever owned. Back then, I believed having your name stitched on something meant it belonged to you, that it mattered. For years, I'd clutched this little piece of cloth like a shield. When Celine called me names, when Malcolm let her, when silence felt safer than speaking, I'd held on to it, like holding on to my mother's voice when mine couldn't come out. But now, I turned the handkerchief over gently in my hands, once, twice, and I whispered, I don't need it anymore. I meant it. It wasn't a rejection. It wasn't anger. Just truth. I wasn't that scared girl anymore. I didn't need a cloth to remind me of who I was, or whose I was. Because now, when someone tried to tell me who I was, I'd tell them myself. I stood up. I left the handkerchief folded neatly on the table, and I stepped outside. The morning was bright, the air thick with that Texas summer heat, I stood there for a long moment, breathing it in, not thinking about Celine, or Malcolm, or even what came next. Just breathing, just being. I didn't look back, not once. But I never forgot the day silence saved me.